So thank you so much. Good afternoon to all of you joining us today to this first inaugural event of Race Talk, an interdisciplinary colloquium series. We appreciate you remaining on mute. People are joining and there's many of us in the call. So if you could please make sure that you are muted through the presentation, that will ensure that our sound offers the best quality. So thank you so much for doing that. I'm Mariana Garriazzo. I'm the coordinator for Race Talks, and it is wonderful to be here with you. I'm going to be introducing the series very briefly, and then I will pass the mic to my colleague Marty Regan, who will be introducing our first speaker for the series. Race Talk is being possible through an Advanced Climate Together grant funded by the College of Liberal Arts. And it aims to ignite conversation on anti-racist advocacy through pedagogy, performance, and research. This is a collaborative project across 6 university units. So we extend our appreciation to our collaborators, the Africana Studies, the dance program, the film program, Latino, Latina, and Mexican American Studies, performance studies, and religious studies. Thank you to all of our collaborators for really ensuring and for their rich contributions to this very interdisciplinary, truly interdisciplinary programming. Thanks are also in order to our wonderful staff who makes the things happen behind the scenes. So many thanks to Myra Rangel, to Darlene Flores, and to Kathy Payne. I would like to mention that these events will take place every Thursday or almost every Thursday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And we hope you can join us for, in a little bit, I will put the website and the link in which you can join and register for these events. We hope to bring together emerging and established BIPOC speakers from a variety of fields to really enrich our conversation and join our students, faculty, and staff at TAMU. To all who are joining today, I invite you to demonstrate the true Aggie spirit, the spirit that sets us apart, and we expect to demonstrate in each one of these events our core values of excellence, integrity, leadership, loyalty, respect, and selfless service. At the very end of this event, I will be inviting all students, participants to complete a very short survey. It's a Qualtrics survey, and so expect that link to happen at the end. It's very short, I promise. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic now to Dr. Regan.
Howdy. Thank you, Mariana, for that introduction. My name is Dr. Martin Regan, and I teach, I'm an associate professor of music in the Department of Performance Studies. Welcome. Just a few words regarding how we're going to interact today throughout the event. Please do remain on mute throughout the presentation. If you have questions at any time, please write them in the chat box, and at the end, we will devote some time to address those questions. So I'm very happy to welcome, as the first inaugural speaker for our Race Talk series, Dr. Allan deSouza. Dr. Allan deSouza's artworks restage colonial-era legacies through counter-strategies of humor, fiction, and mistranslation. Recent projects, Through the Black Country and La Vida del Capitan, transpose Henry Stanley's 1870s African expedition journals to England during the 2016 Brexit vote, and Columbus's 1492 ship diaries to a 2019 expedition from Oakland to Seville. Both projects include expedition maps and photographs. deSouza's work has been shown extensively in the US and internationally. deSouza's book, How Art Can Be Thought, A Handbook for Change, closely examines art pedagogy and critique and provides an extensive analytical glossary of common art terms while considering how they may be adapted to new artistic and social challenges. deSouza's most recent book, Arc of Martyrs, is a polyphonic dysphoric rewrite of Joseph Conrad's infamous Heart of Darkness. deSouza is represented by Talbot Gallery, New York and New Delhi, and is professor and chair of the Department of Arts Practice at the University of California, Berkeley. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Allan deSouza.
Thank you so much, Marty, and Mariana as well. And it's a pleasure to be here. And too bad it can't be in person, but it's so great to see so many of you here. And I'm quite honored to be, I guess, launching this series. So I want to talk to you, I guess, about my own artwork and really frame it with a few questions. And so actually, let me share my screen. Okay. I think, right. And I wanted to talk about, one of the sort of cliches of artistic language, inspiration. And artists often talk about being inspired. And we never really investigate what that means. And so here, on the screen, I have what is its original meaning. Inspiration, and of course it's to inspire. It is to do with breath. That's the original meaning of it. And it means to be breathed into. And it's certainly in its original Christian meaning is to be filled with divine breath. And so, we have a history of that kind of representation through painting, certainly, within Christian iconography. And of course, this is what, even in a sort of secular way, this is the kind of cliche that we think of, that inspiration, is something that, is sort of golden light, birds singing, rose petals, something that strikes us out of the blue, as it were. And that's really what I want to bring into question, and to have us thinking about it in slightly different ways. And I want to link it with being activated. So inspire and to activate, to think of those two frames together. And for me personally, and I don't want to offer this as a definition of inspiration, but it's how I use it for myself. And I use inspiration as a way to connect across difference, and to understand another's experience in the context of my own life. And we can compare that to empathy, as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Although suspicious of empathy, I don't think it's an adequate basis for our social relations. And precisely because we too often use empathy as a claim upon someone else's experience, without really putting ourselves into what that particular experience is them. So although I want to emphasize that I think of inspiration as being relational, I also want to be critical of that and how we use it. And then to be inspired is also to want to make evident the connection between my own experience and my own, and vice versa, that I want my own experience to be part of a discussion, so that people can make a connection in their own lives to my own experience. And another way to think of that is through the terminology of intersectionality. Okay, so therefore inspiration, and for me, at least, are always relational, in relation to other people, other events, other histories, other experiences. And it motivates toward, and motivates others towards our, or my own collective experience. And again, I want to separate this idea of motivating from how we might otherwise think of, we know this phrase of motivational speakers, and often there's a kind of to motivational speaking where it's about, our own success. You can be the best that you can be. You can be rich. You can get everything you want to be, or everything that you want. And I don't mean motivating in that sense. I mean motivating in the sense of moving towards another and having other people move towards your own experience. And again, in the frame of intersectionality, that we create a kind of social relation and a politics, and we act as we always do in our own interests, but always in relation to the interests of others. So, these are the broad frames in which I'm thinking about inspiration and activation. And if we go back even to the original meaning of inspiration, of to be breathed into, I don't think we can think about that anymore in that sense, without also thinking and keeping in our memory Eric Garner, who was killed on July 17th, 2014, and George Floyd, who would be much more in our immediate memories, being killed again by the police on May 25th, 2020. And both of them, their last words, not being able to breathe. And so what does it mean for us to be breathed into? To be inspired, knowing that others are actually deprived of that in very physical, brutal, immediate ways. So to be inspired, again, it's not golden light. It's not this wonderful experience. It means a certain kind of responsibility to the experience of others. What we do with that responsibility. So I want to frame my work, and today, particular framing around the body and my body, and again within a larger framing of brownness. Yes, brownness is particularly discussed around Latinx experience. And I'm thinking here and indebted to the theorist Jose Esteban Munoz, who talks about a sense of brown and the feeling of brown. And one of his frames for how we think of a brown commons is around migration from south to north. Now, of course, that's not the case for me. Although I am from the global south, my migration to the US is from East Africa to England, Europe, actually no longer Europe, and then to the US. So not actually the migration that someone like us is talking about. But I've also grown up, and particularly, in East Africa, where South Asians like myself are part of a kind of colonial buffer between white and black. So between the sort of British and Africans. And to go from that position of colonial buffer to then the experience of brownness in England. Which I think has overlaps with how brownness is perceived here in the US as a kind of contaminating, polluting presence, one that's infiltrating, one that's invasive, one that's asocial, that's criminal, and so on. And so for me to come from that particular experience into the US and seeing how that particular language is applied to another group. But it's also for me to consider what my relationship is to that. So these are some of the sort of intersections which are also related to these notions, these larger notions of being inspired and being activated. Okay, so here's a piece from 2004, and it's a performance that I'm doing in Seoul, in South Korea. And in Korea, migrant workers are principally from China, but also there's a large group population from South Asia, mostly from Bangladesh, but some from Pakistan and also Sri Lanka. And migrant workers, like everywhere else, do the kind of manual menial labor. And I'm here at a gallery opening serving drinks. And so people assumed that the gallery had hired me as a migrant worker to perform this task of serving drinks. And they didn't really think too much about it. This was fairly normal. So I went around the whole evening serving the drinks, and at some point during the evening, I collected together the remaining glasses and the remnants of the drinks and poured them into a basin, into a white basin in the center of the gallery space, and used that liquid as the liquid that I was shaving with. So I began to shave my head and sort of beard stubble with that liquid. And I'm dressed all in white, a white razor, white shaving cream, and so on. And then after shaving, use that water to then refill the glasses and carried on serving that liquid for the rest of the evening. So I really wanted to bring attention to the body that was actually producing the labor. So, you know, I was offering the labor of serving drinks, and now I was literally offering my body to bring attention to who this body is, and that they're consuming my labor, but now here in a kind of very Catholic gesture, and I was raised Catholic, in this very Catholic gesture of offering the body itself. And again, with all those connotations of the brown body as being contaminating and polluting, that produces disgust, and so on. And also that disgust is related to proximity. The closer the brown body or the black body gets, the more fear and disgust it generates. And so what does it mean to offer and to ingest that body as well? Okay. As with a lot of my work, I often have other historical sources. And my sources tend to be from sort of European art history, since that, as an artist, that's the kind of history that I was trained in, and is the primary training within European and American US art schools. So this is one of my sources for the next work, Andreas Vesalius, who was one of the first anatomists to actually make a fairly accurate descriptions of bodily systems. So using Vesalius's drawings, or at least with those in mind, I was at an artist residency, and this was the floor of my studio. And I asked the cleaners not to come into the studio anymore, and I took on the labor of cleaning and mopping the floor. So once a week I would mop the floor, but leave this sort of imprint of my own body on the floor. And so over the 3 months that I was there in the studio, the stain built up in the shape of my own body. And then at the end of the residency, I varnished the floor and allowed it to remain there for the next person. And so this was an artwork really for one other person who I never got to see, or didn't get, I didn't know who that person is. But it was a kind of, to leave it as a kind of a ghostly remnant of my own presence in that space before them. And then the other work I did, one of the other works I did during that residency, this was the painting table I had in my studio. And so again, using Vesalius's drawing as reference, I created an outline of my own body. And you can see the materials there, masking tape and artist's blood. And let me show you details. So I created an outline or a kind of silhouette on the body of my body with masking tape, and then cut into the tape and filled it with my own blood. Now, this piece was taken literally as a source of contamination. And so at the end of my residency, I had an exhibition, and this piece was confiscated and put into quarantine as a biohazard. And I was asked, well, it was demanded that I undergo HIV tests, which of course it's illegal to ask anyone to do that, to prove that my blood was not a biohazard. And of course, once, which would never have been the case anyway, once you expose the HIV virus to air, it stops being functional. So it doesn't get communicated anyway. So again, a kind of hysteria over, based on a lack of science. Something that we've become increasingly familiar with. So another work, as it were. This was done for a particular location in the Canary Islands, which is a volcanic island, and I had an exhibition there. And so, but the Canaries are also a stopping point for migration from West Africa to Europe. The Canaries is owned, quote unquote, by Spain. And so migrants from West Africa, if they got to the Canaries, which is in the Atlantic, they would be under Spanish jurisdiction. And their hope was then they would be transported to the Spanish mainland, from which they could then petition for asylum. But it was high proportion of people trying to get the Canaries to the Canaries would drown before they get there. And for me, this landscape then was really, saturated with the blood of migrants. And so I referred to this quote from Walter Benjamin: "The only writer of history with the gift of setting alight the spark of the past is convinced of this, that not even the dead will be saved from the enemy, if he is victorious. And this enemy has not ceased to be victorious. And this is Walter Benjamin writing in 1940. And the enemy that Benjamin is speaking of is fascism. And fascists rewrite history so that not even the dead will be safe from that rewriting of history. And of course, the dead will be erased. And so it really is an act of remembrance. And just a couple more from, it's a series of 3 diptychs. They're large pieces, they're 40 by 70 inches each one. So it really is, these are, it's my blood, it's about my body, but also trying to situate myself in relation to other histories. Not to claim those histories, but this is specifically about myself, but trying to ground myself within different experiences in the world. And these are just a couple of details. And it's very clearly blood, because blood dries like nothing else. Nothing else dries quite like blood. Okay, so I'm sort of moving around chronologically. I'm not giving you the work in a chronological sequence. This is going back a little earlier to 1999, 2000, a series of landscapes. And here I was thinking about myself coming to America, coming to the US, which I did in 91. And I made a series of landscapes, which are kind of mythical landscapes for me, because I was so familiar with them from watching American movies, like cowboys and Indians, quote unquote, landscapes of the American West, of these expansive, supposedly empty landscapes, which are, landscapes of the frontier. And for me, growing up as Indian, as South Asian, what it meant for me to think of myself in relation to that construction of cowboys and Indians as a different kind of Indian, but also, who are my identifications with? And so here's a landscape with those thoughts in mind. And let me give you another one with a very particular title. And these are models that I've built, and they're very small. They're models which I've then photographed. And to give you a sense of the scale, the size of the model, what looks like a little bush in the front are my eyelashes, and the little, what could be tumbleweed moving across, they're little balls of earwax. And then the background is paper, which is stained as almost as a painting of my own body. And so literally, again, my body, but as landscape. So inserting myself into this sort of constructed notion of the American frontier and what that meant. And of course, the erasure of indigenous inhabitants, this false notion that it's empty land waiting to be occupied. Okay. This is a painting by Robert Duncanson, 1859. and I'll mention it just very briefly in passing. Robert Duncanson is African-American. And I'm always intrigued by this painting. It's 1859, 2 years before the Civil War. Duncanson is the descendant of slaves. What does it mean for him? We don't know what it means for him to paint this. He was certainly supported by abolitionists. But what does it mean for him to paint this idyllic landscape of the Americas? And in this particular genre, landscape painting, which is derived from a particular form of European landscape painting. There's a white couple here, a man and a woman. The man is gesturing towards this little cottage here at the base of the rainbow. What does this idyllic setting mean for someone like Duncanson? And so these are some of my questions for myself when I look at American landscape. And I'm going to go on. I have many more questions about Duncanson, but I think I'm coming back in April for a panel about art and pedagogy, and I might refer to it then, actually, much more. But let me go on with this. And this is one of my photographs, and it's taken on September 11th, 2002. So it's the year after 9/11 and the anniversary of it. And there's a rainbow photographed in Las Vegas. My title is The Gods Send Signs. So because it's the anniversary of 9/11, the first anniversary, there's that sign, God Bless America. But there's this rainbow over what looks like a mosque as another kind of sign. And that mosque-like building is actually the Aladdin Casino. Here's another image, another photograph taken on the same day. And on the left, you see the Aladdin Casino with its sort of minaret there. In the middle is the balloon of the Goncourt brothers, which is the Paris Casino. And a little bit towards the right is Caesar's Palace with the American flag on it. And 2002, we had just invaded Afghanistan. 2003, we're about to invade Iraq. Aladdin in mythology is the thief of Baghdad. And I was interested in that relationship. It's a political relationship between the US as Caesar's Palace. So we have the American flag on Caesar's Palace. In relation to the thief of Baghdad, the Aladdin Casino, and this casino standing in between. And France was one of the few countries to veto the US invasion of Iraq when it was petitioned in the UN. And so I was interested in that political moment actually being exemplified by our landscape. That here's a kind of innocuous, if we can think of Vegas as innocuous, but a kind of supposedly politically neutral landscape, and yet has a kind of political interpretation of that particular moment. And subsequently, actually, once we invaded Iraq, the Aladdin Casino was demolished because the interior was Baghdad. And so during the war in Iraq, for whatever reason, it felt like, well, we didn't need a casino based on the theme of Baghdad. Okay. So while I was making these, while I was taking photographs of existing landscapes, I was also making models. And here's one called Shadows Cross Madinat al-Salam. And Madinat al-Salam translates as the city of peace. And it was a legendary 7th century city that now is Baghdad. And these are models made out of trash, recycled trash. Another model, but really of a mythical notion again, before arriving in the US, of my notion of Manhattan. And the model is made from found materials actually collected off the streets in Manhattan, computer parts, transistor radios, etc. I was doing a residency in New York in spring 2001, before 9/11. And so this piece, again, collecting material from the streets of Manhattan, and this piece was finished in August 2001, before 9/11. And again, part of that same series, but a work that's made later. Everything west of here is Indian country is a phrase that's often used as a kind of open shooting season. Like everything west of here is Indian country means you can shoot anything that moves. And it's also a quote from a US soldier in Baghdad. So equating Baghdad with the US frontier as well, and my own relationship to them. Here's another sort of historical reference, Hunters in the Snow from 1565, which I've then used for another landscape, and also having this quote from Zora Neale Hurston in mind. And those figures are all of me. And this piece was done during that residency where I also did the floor stain and the table. And these are images of me, and the dogs are also a different kind of skin tones. And again, in sharp contrast to this sort of landscape of sort of whiteness. So I have a whole series of these other landscapes, again, about these sort of pristine kind of snow white landscapes, again, built from models, which I then photographed. And here, those little bushes you see in the foreground are my fingernails and toenail clippings, kind of erupting through a ground of salt. And these are made from candles. And again, in the context of in the invasion of Afghanistan, and post 9/11, about what it means to mourn, which is why I was using melted candles. And then here's again made from melted candles, but an image that replicates the kind of landscapes we were seeing in Afghanistan, of these bombed landscapes that are already decimated. Okay, so I'm going to make a big jump and come to work in the present. And there's a much larger context for these works, where I'm also taking photographs of landscapes. But I want to show you here just the interiors. And it's from the Mirrors and Other Encounters series. And these are photographs well, they're from photographs, I should say. I call them renderings. They're from photographs I took in my father's apartment after he died in 2018. And my father lived in Portugal, and so I wasn't able to get to see him, and was only able to get to Portugal after he died. And so then photographed his apartment as he left it. And I was interested in what kinds of narratives we can put together as a kind of archive of material culture. You know, what stories can we tell from what someone leaves behind? And this is something that's become, I think, too common experience under COVID, where too many of us have this experience. You know, my father died before COVID, but I'm doing the work now. So this was actually my dad's bed. And he was a hoarder, to put it bluntly, but I was thinking, you know, how else can we think of it? And I think of it as him archiving his own life. And that's how I'm approaching it. So essentially, these are digital paintings. And let me give you some details. So they're paintings, they're rendered as paint. But you can see here, there's actually photographs, and I've left them, oops, sorry. I've left them as photographs. This is actually my father. I don't know if you can see my cursor. My father, that's their wedding photograph. And here's an image of my mother. And the larger context for the work is that I've done a similar series of works after my mother died, and she died in 2004. Okay. So another one from the series called Port Home. And again, this is my dad's bed. And you can see it you know, looking closely, it tells a larger picture of him, of what he kept, what his interests were, what his anxieties were. As I mentioned, he lived in Portugal, so some of the language there is in Portuguese. You know, there's a wine bottle. There's a framed image actually of my children, so his grandchildren. There's an image, there's another framed image of my mother in the background. And you could, once you get closer, you can see it's not a photograph. It's not quite a painting, it's something. We're not quite sure what it is we're looking at. Some of it appears to be more photographic than other areas. This sort of rendering here is much more photographic in detail than some of the documents. You know, this box of chocolates, for example, was one I had sent him. Again, you see photographs. There's lots of material about medical information, about my father's own concerns about his health. You know, more pill bottles and so on. You know, he kept newspaper cuttings. And again, these are rendered by me by hand. There's a postcard which is actually addressed to me there. But these are postcards that I'd also given to my mother. And so my mother in some ways was the kind of historian of our family. She collected a lot of these materials. And then after she died, my father kept those things, but never kept them in order. They were kind of strewn around the apartment. This was his closet. And it's mostly his clothing, although there's some clothing from my mother. And what I've done, and again, what makes it really clear that it's not a photograph, is that I haven't painted in the hangers. And so the clothing is just floating in midair, as if they're still held up by the body. And these are in his bathrooms, and in some ways, especially with the bathroom images, I'm going back to some of the images that I began talking about, or at the beginning, about the notion of the body, the brown body, as pollution, as a contaminant. And for my father, growing up, first in India, well, first in Goa, which was a Portuguese colony, and that's where he was educated. Then in India as a British colony, and then again in Kenya as another British colony. What it meant for him to grow up and have, half of his adult life being colonized, and to feel his own body, his own brownness being colonized. And so that really was what it meant for me to look closely at the place where he maintains his own body, and the notion of cleaning, the place where one cleans one's own body. So, a triptych, and I'll show you details. So, the shower head, and there's a detail, and of course, when you're getting closer, you can see it is painting and not photographic. The mirror, and here the mirror doesn't reflect anything. And then a brush, which is used to clean the surfaces, the toilet, the bidet. And here it becomes a little more apparent as well. This is the bathroom cabinet. And these are things which are used to, to clean the body, but to whiten the body. The toothpaste, the soap, the tiger balm is to heal the body from aches and pains. But the most explicit is this Fair and Handsome cream, which is a whitening cream. And my father bought it in India. And we can tell it from the price sticker, which is in rupees. And this sort of anxiety of the brown body as ugly, as contaminating, and then the pressure to whiten it in order to assimilate, in order to fit in. And there's a detail. And Fair and Handsome, is a really well-known and popular product. And I've also rendered the different kinds of stainings, which are from use, and the sort of remnants of the bodily physical presence in these spaces. Here's another one, which is actually one I'm working on at the moment, so it's unfinished, called Perfumado, and you can see it's from the label on the right, which is for cleaning, and again for washing one's clothes and to leave them scented. and again, cleaning supplies. And towards the left, you can see there's 4 candles wrapped in plastic, and it's Joseph and sort of infant Jesus. So there's father and son, and I mentioned I was raised Catholic. My father was Catholic, and so this particular resonance of father and son and what that means to me in my relationship with my father. And I don't identify as male, I identify as non-binary. And so again, that complicated relationship with my father.
Allan?
Yes.
My apologies for interrupting. I just wanted to let you know we have less than 10 minutes before the Q&A.
Okay, and so I'm just about to end. Thanks, Marty. I think, yeah, this, there's more to do in this image. Obviously there's the labels, there's the shadows, the kind of details, and so on. And another one, which actually will be the last image I'll show, is a list that my father made while my mother was still alive. And it was a list that they were making before they were going on the trip, which I found in one of the drawers. And so all the things to pack, and then the last item on the list is switch off. Okay, so Marty, maybe I'll leave it there, actually.
Thank you very much, Allan. That engaging introduction to your work. There's just so much to talk about here. So we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So what I'd like to ask you all to do now is if you have any questions, first of all, write them in the chat box. And while you do that, as moderator, I will just get the Q&A started by answering a question of my own, if you don't mind. So the first question I'd like to ask you, Allan, is how have you adjusted your creative or scholarship and various related projects in response to social justice, the current pandemic, and the political situation in our country?
No, thanks, Marty. I mean, that's such a pressing question for all of us. And, I talked about inspiration and activation as a kind of responsibility. And, I don't make any kind of case for my work being an activist. And partly because I don't think, artworks can certainly function that way with the intention of being activist. But I think they don't have to do that. And partly because as artists, we don't really have control over how viewers are activated. We make the work and we put it into the public sphere. And we can direct viewers towards certain things, but we can't tell them how to think. We can't tell them what to feel. We don't have control over how viewers respond. And so my directions are more towards how can I activate people rather than turn them into activists. And my focus is more upon the things that are unspoken, unseen, perhaps things which are on a sort of intimate scale, the everyday, sometimes the things which are erased and forgotten, and and I guess particularly under this during this year, that where we are so so many of us restricted in our social gatherings and often like in smaller spaces. What does it mean to engage with the everyday, the intimate, and the overlooked, and especially in relation to climate change. I really want to make work that also is addressing the intimate. I'm not interested in the heroic and the grand scale, and I don't want to make work which relies on a huge amount of resources. So I am looking to the smaller scale. Does that get to what
Yes.
you're thinking about?
Yes, thank you very much for that detailed answer. We do have a couple of questions that have come in the chat box. The first one is from Regan van der Elsen. Why have you chosen the background for Zoom that you have, and does it mean anything to you?
Oh, thanks, Regan. I'm not sure what it means yet. It might be an image that's both a desire and an anxiety. It's an airport. So it's a space that actually we don't get to go to again. I normally do travel a lot for both my work and for my family, who are live in different parts of the world, and of course I haven't got to see them in at least a year, year and a half, and so there's that constant living with wanting to see them and what that would entail. So the anxiety of traveling to get to see people. What I've done with the airport, which is a photograph I've taken, is I've removed and covered all the signage and have begun to reinsert photographs that I've taken. So that image of sinners, we're all sinners, was actually taken at a demonstration of someone standing in front of me. And the image next to that was taken at the bus station in Manhattan, in New York. And so I'm just thinking of places that I don't get to see or haven't been able to go to. So it's reflective of desire and anxiety.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Julia Helmlich. Can you explain how your source, the gods send signs, relates to your message?
The source being Duncanson's.
Julia, is that what you mean? You can unmute yourself for a moment, sure.
He had a photograph that he took, and it was titled "The God Send Signs," and I was just wondering how that related to his message.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it was, yeah, as I mentioned, it's a photograph taken on the first anniversary of 9/11. Yeah, I tend not to think in terms of the work having a message, and that's related to this idea of activism. And for me, to be activist means to be thinking more along the lines of there's something specific that I want the viewer to think about. And it's something I want them to respond in a particular way. And I think that's more in line with the idea of a message. And because I'm presenting work in a way which is much more open-ended, I want viewers to find their own alignments with the work. and to situate their own histories and their own experiences with it. So I'm actually not presenting any messages at all, because I'm not trying to get the viewer to think of anything in particular. I'm sort of directing the viewer to, I guess, to a complex of things, but how the viewer responds to them, that's really up to them. But in that particular one, you know, the signage of God Bless America was one sign with the rainbow over this mosque-like building, felt like another sign. And I wanted to make the link to Duncanson's painting where the rainbow in this idyllic landscape, the rainbow over the cottage feels like a very particular sign of an idyllic landscape. And whether Duncanson meant it as a kind of escape or what America could be, or what an image of what the US could be after slavery, or beyond slavery, or after the abolition of slavery. You know, we don't know what Duncanson meant, but I think his image is open-ended in terms of what that signage means. And so, you know, I was following something similar.
Thank you very much, Allan. The next question is from Mariana Gariazzo. Is this group of works about your father produced in 2020? Could this turn towards intimacy in your father's everyday life be connected to any event that activated in your life?
Yeah, I began that series in 2018 after he died. Actually, Marty, maybe can I share my screen again?
Of course, sure.
Just give a little bit more of a context for that work. Okay, so these are the works that I did after my mother died. After my mother died in 2004, and these are photographs that my father took, actually in Kenya, and from 1962 to 1965, which is why the date of these works are from 1962, from when my father took the photographs, to 2005 when I finished the series. So an image of my mother. And that's a detail, so you know it's actually not a photograph. It's actually more like a drawing. And then these are some of the other images, again from photographs my father took in the 60s. And I made them into prints and put those prints around my apartment. So this one was in my shower, and over a period of months, the photograph gets washed away. This one was in my bathroom basin, and so it gets covered with kind of staining from me brushing my teeth, you know, and so on. So they get stained over the course of everyday life. And so the detritus from the everyday in my present life covers over the image from the past. And so I was trying to create a series of photographs that worked in a way that memory itself functions as something that's continuously in formation, that's always at the brink of being lost, which is why they're called the lost pictures. And they're constantly being erased. This is a detail. So after my father died in 2018, I started photographing the same location every single day. And so this is like a month of these photographs of the same location. And I'll give you a few of these, just organized by month. And I'll show you some details. And I did this for a year, every day for a year. as a kind of ritual, almost of mourning. And what does it mean? Literally the space of reflection, the time and space of reflection. And so these are single images from that series of 365 prints. They're quite large. And again, they're about the surface of each one. And they're of a tree, but they're all of a reflection of a tree, reflection in water. So you never see the tree itself. So the subject of the photograph is actually outside the photographic frame. You're only ever seeing its reflection. And so, the work, and there are essays that go with the prints. They're also about what it means to reflect on something. For me, as the child of my father, what does it mean as me as a reflection of him and of my mother? What does it mean to look at an unstable surface, which is the surface of water? And then to be photographing something that's not in the frame, but only its reflection. Something that appears to be abstract, perhaps. You can't quite tell the depth. But these are unmanipulated photographs. That some of them don't really make visual sense. We're not quite sure what we're looking at. They look like digital overlays. And they also present a kind of ecosystem over a year as well. That I was photographing at the same time as I was making the My father lived, as I mentioned, in Portugal, and he lived facing the sea. And his favorite place was sitting on his balcony looking at the sea. And doing this every single day for a year. That I was really interested in, and sort of restaging them and replicating them. And so, Julia, to go back to your question, that really is the larger context for that work. Bring these other questions about how to memorialize a person.
Thank you very much, Allan. We have a question from Andrea Imhoff. From Andrea, I have a question about a specific piece. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of it. I'm referring to the snowscape with the toenail clippings as shrubbery. There's a long-held urban myth that the toe and fingernails continue growing after death. Was that continued growth after death idea part of the inspiration for that particular piece?
Oh, such an interesting question. Actually, I hadn't thought of that, but thank you for the reference now. Yeah, I guess it's not true that they do grow after death. Actually, what happens is that your skin shrinks, and so it looks like the nails are longer. Mm. But there are interesting possibilities there. So thank you, Andrea, for that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and I'll go to Mallory Stroh. What is the most difficult medium you've had to work with?
Yeah. One of the things I do talk about publicly, my mother was blind when she died. And I had just come back from Kenya. And she was born there, but had never gone back. And so she wasn't able to see the photographs I'd taken there. And so I spent the last week with her describing the photographs. And so for me, that the photographs are insufficient. They needed, at least in that instance, to be translated, and in that instance into verbal language. So I described the photographs so that my mother could picture them. And so I became really interested in that sort of mental imaging, that interior imaging. And I talk about this publicly as well. The really close looking. I'm losing my vision. And so these renderings of my father's closely I can look. And can I look in a sustained way? And so, so a lot of my work is a test for myself. So they're looking at trees every single day. What does it mean to look? At what my father accumulated and try to remake them, looking really closely at details. To myself. The other medium that's really hard to work with is blood, but I won't get into that.
Well, Allan, thank you so much for sharing your details of your artistic process and even your personal life and how that has impacted your creative work. On behalf of Texas A&M University and Department of Performance Studies, thank you so much for being the inaugural speaker for Race Talks. Mariana?
Yeah, same here. I second Marty. We are so grateful for your participation, for sharing with us your amazing, insightful artistry this afternoon. And we have a lot to think about. And this has been a great event to launch the series. And we hope we get many more events. Please stay in tune, visit the Race Talks website, and keep in touch. Allan deSouza, it has been such a pleasure to have you and to chat with you today. Thank you so much for your visit, and we will see you again on April 22nd for the anti-racist pedagogy panel.
And Mariana, correct me if I'm wrong, but are we staying a few minutes afterwards to have one-on-one?
Yes, we're gonna stay for a little bit longer if anyone wants to ask questions or chat. We're going to stay, but I'm going to now say goodbye to those that need to go and stop the recording.